Flight attendant abandons his wife. 10 years later, he finds her on his flight with another man and is shocked when he discovers. Jack Harrison adjusted his flight attendant uniform, checking his reflection in the airport locker room mirror. At 45, his life seemed perfect. A stable job, an engagement to a beautiful executive, and a promising future. But behind the rehearsed smile, a secret had been eating away at him for 10 years. As he walked toward the boarding gate, Jack felt a familiar pang of guilt. For a moment, his mind drifted back to that fateful night 10 years ago. He remembered writing a cold note, his hands trembling as he left behind Sarah and little Emily, who was just a few months old at the time. The fear of responsibility and the promise of freedom had led him to make a choice that would haunt him for a decade. Shaking his head to push away the memories, Jack forced a smile and began greeting passengers boarding the flight to Los Angeles. It was just another day at work, or so he thought. "Next, please," Jack called out automatically, his eyes focused on the tickets in his hand. When he looked up, his heart stopped. Standing before him was Sarah. Older, more elegant, but unmistakably Sarah. Next to her, a kind-looking man held the hand of a girl around 10 years old. Emily, his daughter. Jack's world began to spin. He felt as though the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Sarah stared at him, her eyes widening in recognition, then narrowing with a mixture of anger and shock. The man, who Jack assumed was Sarah's new husband, seemed confused by the sudden tension. "Ticket, please," Jack managed to say, his voice trembling slightly. Sarah handed over the tickets without a word, her eyes never leaving Jack's face. Emily, curious and unaware of the tension, smiled at Jack. "Hi, Mr. Flight Attendant," she said cheerfully. Jack felt like he'd been punched in the gut. His daughter's voice, one he had never heard grow up, was like a knife in his heart. As the family passed by him, Jack felt his legs give way. He took a step back, tripping over his uniform bag that he had left on the floor. In an instant, he found himself falling, desperately grabbing the nearby drink cart for balance. The cart toppled over with a deafening crash, bottles and glasses shattering on the aisle floor. Nearby passengers gasped, some jumping back to avoid the shards. "Jack, what happened?" Lisa, his fellow flight attendant, shouted, rushing to help. Jack stood up, his face red with shame and panic. I tripped. I'm sorry," he stammered, avoiding looking in the direction of Sarah and her family. As he and Lisa quickly cleaned up the mess, Jack could feel the eyes of the passengers on him. But no gaze was heavier than Sarah's, which he could feel burning into his back. With the aisle cleared and the passengers finally seated, Jack retreated to the service area of the plane. His heart was racing, and he could feel cold sweat running down his back. The reality of the situation hit him like a wave. He was going to be stuck on this plane for hours, just feet away from the family he had abandoned. Jack closed his eyes, trying to calm himself. He knew he had to make a decision. Should he try to talk to Sarah, ignore her presence and pray for the flight to end quickly, or ask to be replaced, risking his job? As the pilot announced the imminent takeoff, Jack realized he had no choice but to face the coming hours. With a deep sigh, he braced himself for what would undoubtedly be the longest flight of his life. The plane took off, and Jack felt his stomach drop not from the ascent, but from the weight of the situation. He took a deep breath, bracing himself for the hours ahead. With trembling hands, he began pushing the drink cart down the aisle. As he approached the row where Sarah, David, and Emily were seated, Jack felt his heart race. He forced a professional smile. "Would you like something to drink?" Sarah looked up, her eyes meeting Jack's. For a moment, he saw a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, confusion, before she quickly looked away. "No, "Thank you," she replied coldly. David, sensing the tension, asked for a soda. Emily, excited, said, "I want orange juice, please." As Jack served the drinks, his mind drifted back to that fateful night. He could see himself again, grabbing his suitcase, glancing at the crib where Emily slept. Fear consumed him. Fear of failing as a father, fear of losing his freedom. With one last look at Sarah sleeping, he walked out the door, leaving behind nothing but a cold note on the kitchen table. "Sir, are you okay?" Emily's voice snapped him back to the present. Jack realized he had stopped pouring the juice, the cup overflowing. "Oh, I'm sorry," he stammered, quickly wiping up the spill. Emily smiled, unaware of the anguish she caused Jack. "You look sad," she said. "Want to see my drawing? It always cheers me up." Jack felt a lump in his throat. "I'd love to," he managed to say. Emily showed him a colorful drawing of a family, her, Sarah, and David. Jack felt a sharp pain seeing the place where he should have been, now filled by another man. Sarah watched the interaction silently, her expression unreadable. Jack could feel the weight of her gaze, the tension between them palpable. Continuing his service, Jack overheard fragments of conversations from the passengers around him. A man commented on a recent legal case involving children's rights. "That lawyer, Sarah Bennett, did an amazing job," he said. Jack almost dropped a tray. Sarah Bennett, she had kept her last name. And now she was a successful lawyer, specializing in children's rights. The irony wasn't lost on him. The woman he had abandoned with a child now fought for the rights of other children. Guilt consumed him even more. While he had been living his life, traveling the world, Sarah had not only raised Emily alone but also built an impressive career. Jack felt small, insignificant in comparison. Emily continued to chatter happily with Jack, oblivious to the emotional turmoil she caused. She talked about her school, her friends, and her dreams of becoming an artist. Every word was a painful reminder of what Jack had lost, of the moments he would never get back. Sarah remained silent, but her eyes never left Jack. He could feel her anger, her hurt, almost as tangible as the air between them. David, sensing the tense atmosphere, tried to keep Emily distracted, but the girl seemed fascinated by the kind flight attendant. Jack struggled to keep his composure. Every forced smile, every polite response to Emily was a battle against the urge to apologize, to beg for forgiveness. But he knew he didn't have that right. Not after 10 years. As he walked away from the family's row, Jack heard Emily ask Sarah, "Mom, why do you seem so mad at the nice flight attendant?" The silence that followed was deafening. Jack quickened his pace, fleeing from the answer he knew would come eventually. Back in the service area, Jack leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. How could he endure more hours of this torment? The guilt gnawed at him, growing with every interaction with Emily, with every cold look from Sarah. Suddenly, the plane shook violently. Cups fell. Luggage shifted in the overhead compartments. A voice announced over the loudspeaker, "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing an area of severe turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts immediately." Jack grabbed onto the counter, his heart racing. He knew he needed to check on the passengers to ensure their safety. But that meant facing Sarah and Emily again, this time in a potentially dangerous situation. With a deep sigh, Jack straightened up. Turbulence or not, he had a job to do. And maybe, just maybe, this was an opportunity to show Sarah that he wasn't the coward who had left them 10 years ago. Determined, Jack stepped into the aisle, ready to face not only the physical turbulence but also the emotional storm that awaited him. The plane shook violently, causing surprised and fearful cries from the passengers. Jack steadied himself in the aisle, gripping the backs of the seats as he moved forward, checking that everyone had their seatbelts fastened. "Please, stay seated," he shouted, trying to make himself heard above the noise of the engines and the growing panic. As he approached Sarah and her family's row, Jack saw something that surprised him. Emily, instead of being scared, was calmly talking to a child in the seat next to her. "It's okay," Jack heard Emily say. "It's just like a roller coaster. It'll pass soon." The child, who had been crying moments before, was now listening to Emily with full attention, the tears subsiding. Jack felt an unexpected surge of pride. His daughter, whom he barely knew, was showing remarkable courage and maturity. Another strong jolt made Jack stumble. He fell near Sarah's seat and their eyes met for a brief moment. For an instant, the anger in her gaze was replaced with concern. "Are you all right?" Sarah asked, her voice a mix of irritation and genuine worry. Jack nodded, quickly getting up. "I'm fine, thanks." He noticed David placing a protective arm around Emily, while Sarah held the girl's hand. The scene made him feel like an outsider, a stranger watching the intimacy of a united family. A cry of pain grabbed Jack's attention. A passenger a few rows ahead had been hit by a bag that fell from the overhead compartment. Without hesitation, Jack rushed to help. "I need an ice pack and the first aid kit," he shouted to his fellow flight attendant. To his surprise, Sarah stood up. "I'm a lawyer, but I have first aid training," she said, joining Jack. Together, they tended to the injured passenger. Jack cleaned the man's forehead wound while Sarah applied pressure to stop the bleeding. Their movements were synchronized, as if the years of separation had never happened. "Good job," Jack murmured, surprised by Sarah's efficiency. She only nodded, her face a mask of concentration. But Jack noticed a slight tremble in her hands, revealing that the situation affected her more than she was letting on. Meanwhile, Emily continued comforting the passengers around her. Her calm voice and encouraging words seemed to have a soothing effect on the frightened adults. Jack couldn't help but notice the contrast between the scared little girl he had left behind and the brave young woman she had become. Every word, every gesture of Emily's was a painful reminder of what he had lost, the thousands of little moments he had never experienced. The turbulence began to subside and a collective sigh of relief echoed through the cabin. Jack and Sarah finished attending to the injured passenger, and she turned to go back to her seat. "Sarah," Jack called softly. She stopped, looking at him with a cautious expression. "Thanks for the help. And Emily is incredible. You've done an amazing job with her." For a moment, Sarah's expression softened, but her eyes quickly hardened again. "I had to," she replied coldly. "I didn't have a choice, since I was on my own." The words hit Jack like a punch. He watched Sarah return to her seat, where Emily immediately began excitedly recounting how she helped during the turbulence. Jack felt a mix of admiration and regret growing inside him. Emily wasn't just brave, she was kind, empathetic, and mature beyond her years, and all of that without him in her life. As he made his way back to the service area, Jack stumbled again, this time bumping into Sarah's bag, which was in the aisle. The bag fell, spilling its contents. "Sorry," Jack muttered, quickly kneeling to gather the items. His eyes caught a partially visible document. The header read, "Adoption Petition." Jack felt his heart stop. Adoption? Was David planning to legally adopt Emily? That would mean he'd lose any legal right to his daughter. Before he could fully process what he had seen, Sarah snatched the papers from his hand. "That's none of your business," she hissed, her eyes flashing with anger. Jack stood up, stunned. He watched as Sarah carefully put the documents away, his world spinning. The realization hit him with full force. Not only had he missed 10 years of Emily's life, but now he was at risk of losing her entirely. As he returned to his duties, Jack felt the weight of this discovery. He knew he had to make a decision. Should he intervene? Try to claim a place in Emily's life? Or was it too late? With these questions tormenting his mind, Jack prepared for the rest of the flight, knowing that the next few hours could change the course of his life forever. Jack couldn't shake what he'd seen in Sarah's documents. Taking advantage of a calm moment on the flight, he returned to the spot where her bag had fallen, hoping to find a forgotten paper. To his surprise, a document was partially visible under a seat. With his heart racing, Jack grabbed the paper and quickly read it. His blood froze. The document mentioned Emily's rare medical condition, which required an urgent bone marrow transplant. Jack felt the world spinning around him. Suddenly, a memory surfaced. Years ago, during a routine checkup, the doctor had mentioned that Jack had a rare blood type, the same as Sarah's. Could it be possible that he was compatible with Emily? The thought struck him like lightning. He could be his daughter's only chance. But how could he bring it up? How could he explain that he knew about Emily's condition? Jack decided to try and get more information. He approached Sarah, who was alone while David and Emily had gone to the restroom. "Sarah," he began hesitantly, I couldn't help but notice some papers when your bag fell. Is Emily okay?" Sarah stared at him, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. "What exactly did you see, Jack?" "Something about a medical condition," he replied, trying to sound casual. "I just wanted to know if there's anything I can do to help." "Help?" Sarah laughed bitterly. "You lost that right 10 years ago, Jack. Emily is well taken care of. We don't need you." The coldness in Sarah's words hurt him, but Jack pressed on. "I know I don't deserve it, but if there's anything I can do." "What could you possibly do?" Sarah interrupted. "You don't even know her. Leave us alone, Jack. It's the least you can do after all this time." Before Jack could respond, his phone rang. It was Amanda, his fiancée. He hesitated before answering. "Hi, love." Amanda's cheerful voice came through the line. "Just calling to check how the flight's going. Can't wait to see you tonight." Jack felt a wave of guilt wash over him. There he was, contemplating intervening in his ex-family's life while his fiancée waited for him, unaware of it all. "It's fine," he replied, conscious of Sarah watching him. "I'll call you when I land, okay?" Hanging up, Jack found himself torn between two worlds. The past he had abandoned and the future he was planning. The decision to reveal his suspicion about being a potential donor for Emily now seemed even more complicated. Sarah, noticing the conflict in Jack, spoke in a softer but still defensive tone. "Jack, I know you must feel guilty, but Emily has a life, a family. David has been more of a father to her than you ever were. Please, don't complicate things." Sarah's words felt like daggers. Jack knew she was right, but the idea of possibly saving Emily's life consumed him. He opened his mouth to speak, but was interrupted by a shout from the back of the plane. "Help! My wife! The baby's coming!" Jack and Sarah turned simultaneously toward the source of the shout. A woman was bent over, clearly in premature labor. "I need towels and hot water," Jack shouted to his fellow flight attendant, rushing toward the laboring passenger. Sarah, momentarily forgetting her animosity, followed Jack. "I can help," she said, her voice now professional and focused. As they prepared to handle the imminent birth, Jack couldn't help but think about the irony of the situation. Here he was, about to assist in the birth of a child while wrestling with the possibility of saving the life of the daughter he had abandoned. Jack's internal conflict reached its peak. He knew he had to focus on the emergency in front of him, but his mind kept drifting back to Emily and the shocking revelation about her health. As Jack and Sarah positioned themselves to help with the delivery, he wondered if he would have the courage to reveal his suspicion about being a potential donor. And if he did, how would it affect not only Emily and Sarah, but also his current life with Amanda. With chaos erupting on the plane and the laboring woman screaming in pain, Jack knew that the next few hours would be crucial, not just for the woman and her baby, but possibly for the future of his own daughter. Jack and Sarah rushed to the passenger in labor, focused on the emergency. The woman, lying on the airplane floor, screamed in pain. "Take a deep breath," Sarah instructed, holding the woman's hand. "What's your name?" "Maria," the woman panted. Jack quickly gathered towels and hot water. "The baby is coming fast," he said, positioning himself to help. Sarah and Jack worked together, their movements synchronized by instinct. Years of separation seemed to fade in the urgency of the moment. "Push now, Maria," Sarah shouted. With one final effort from Maria, the baby was born into Jack's hands. The relief was short-lived. "He's not breathing," Jack said, his voice tense. Sarah immediately started performing CPR on the newborn while Jack cleared the airways. Agonizing seconds passed until a faint cry filled the air. "It's a boy," Jack announced, handing the baby to Maria. Although the baby was breathing, he was still struggling. "He needs urgent medical attention," Sarah said, concerned. Jack nodded and went to inform the pilot. When he returned, he found Sarah monitoring the baby's vital signs. "You were amazing," Jack said softly. Sarah looked at him, exhausted but grateful. "We both were. We still work well together." Jack felt a lump in his throat, remembering other tough moments they had faced together in the past. David approached, his expression a mix of admiration and unease. "Sarah, do you need help?" "We're fine," Sarah replied, her eyes still focused on the baby. "Jack, can you grab more towels?" As Jack walked away, he overheard David murmur to Sarah, "You two seem so connected." Sarah sighed. "David, this isn't the time. We have an emergency here." Jack returned with the towels, sensing the tension between the couple. He focused on caring for Maria and the baby, staying out of it. After stabilizing the situation, Sarah pulled Jack aside. "Jack, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" Jack asked, noticing the conflict in her eyes. Sarah hesitated. "Seeing you today, working with me like old times, it made me realize that I never completely stopped thinking about you. Even after everything." Jack's heart raced, confused by her sudden confession. Before he could respond, the pilot announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, due to the medical emergency, we will be making an unscheduled landing in Denver. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." "Sarah, Jack began, but was interrupted as David called Sarah back to her seat. As Sarah walked away, Jack watched her, his mind in turmoil. The possibility of being a donor for Emily, Sarah's unexpected confession, his commitment to Amanda, everything swirled in his head. The plane began its descent. Jack saw Sarah protectively holding Emily, with David beside them, her gaze shifting between her family and Jack. Jack focused on his duties, ensuring the safety of the passengers. But inside, he wrestled with the implications of what had just happened. As Denver's airport came into view, Jack knew that this unscheduled landing could change many lives. With a heavy heart and a confused mind, he braced himself to face the consequences of a past that refused to stay behind. The plane began its descent into Denver, and the tension in the cabin was palpable. Jack moved through the aisle, checking to make sure all the passengers were safe. His eyes kept drifting towards Sarah, David, and Emily. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're starting our final approach. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened," the pilot announced. Jack felt the weight of the decision he had to make. The suspicion that he might be a compatible donor for Emily consumed him. He knew that revealing this could change everything, but Emily's well-being was his priority now. As he passed by Sarah's row, Emily called out to him, "Mr. Jack, we're going to be okay. right? Jack smiled, feeling an inexplicable connection to the girl. Yes, Emily. Everything's going to be fine. You've been very brave today. Sarah watched the interaction, her face a mix of emotions. David, next to her, seemed uncomfortable with the closeness between Jack and Emily. The plane jolted as it hit a patch of turbulence. Jack instinctively reached out his hand to Emily, who grabbed it without hesitation. Sarah and David exchanged worried glances. "Jack, we need you up front," called Lisa, his fellow flight attendant. Reluctantly, Jack let go of Emily's hand and made his way to the front of the plane. As he walked away, he heard Emily ask Sarah, "Mom, why does Mr. Jack look so sad when he looks at us?" Jack didn't hear Sarah's response, but Emily's question echoed in his mind. He wondered how his life would have been if he hadn't left his family 10 years ago. Suddenly, his phone vibrated. It was Amanda, his fiancée, calling again. Jack hesitated before answering. "Hey, love, I heard on the news about an emergency landing in Denver. Is it your flight?" Amanda's worried voice came through. "Yeah, it is. We had a medical emergency on board," Jack replied, feeling guilty for not thinking about her sooner. "Oh my God, are you okay? When will you be home?" Jack hesitated. I'm not sure yet. I'll call you when I know more, okay?" After hanging up, Jack felt the weight of his two lives colliding. On one side, Amanda and the future he had planned. On the other, Sarah, Emily, and a chance to make things right for the mistakes of the past. The plane touched down with a jolt, reminding Jack of his immediate responsibilities. He helped coordinate the passengers' exit, making sure Maria and her baby were the first to receive medical attention. As the passengers disembarked, Jack noticed Sarah and David arguing in hushed tones. Emily stood a few steps away, watching Jack curiously. Jack made a decision. Grabbing a piece of paper, he quickly wrote a note to Sarah. "We need to talk. It's about Emily. Please meet me at gate 15 in an hour." Approaching Sarah, Jack discreetly handed her the note. "Thank you for your help today," he said aloud, for David's benefit. Sarah took the note, looking confused. David watched the exchange with growing suspicion. "What's going on here?" David asked, his voice tense. Sarah quickly tucked the note away. "Nothing. Jack was just thanking us for helping with the delivery." David didn't seem convinced. "Is there something you're not telling me, Sarah? Did you know this man before?" Sarah hesitated, looking from David to Jack. "David, At that moment, Emily interrupted. "Dad, why are you mad? Mr. Jack was so nice today." The tension was thick. Jack knew he had made things even more complicated, but Emily's health was his top priority now. "I'm sorry, I need to go," Jack said, quickly stepping away. As he headed toward the exit, Jack heard David say to Sarah, "I think we have a lot to talk about." Jack knew that his decision to write the note could have serious consequences, but the chance to help Emily outweighed any personal concerns. Stepping off the plane, Jack looked back one last time. He saw Sarah discreetly reading the note, her expression shifting from confusion to shock. David was watching, his suspicion clearly growing. Jack took a deep breath, preparing for the conversation that could change everything. He knew that in the next few hours, crucial decisions would have to be made. Decisions that would affect not only his life but also Sarah, David, Emily, and even Amanda. With one last glance at the family he had left behind, Jack walked toward the terminal, his heart heavy with the knowledge that nothing would be the same after tonight. The plane finally landed in Los Angeles after hours of tension and uncertainty. Jack, with his heart racing, approached Sarah's seat as the passengers began to prepare for disembarking. "Sarah," Jack whispered softly, handing her a folded piece of paper. "Please read this when you can." Sarah hesitated but quickly took the note. Before she could put it away, David noticed the exchange. "What's that?" David asked, his voice tense. Sarah tried to hide the paper, but David was quicker. He grabbed the note and unfolded it despite Sarah's protests. "We need to talk about Emily," David read aloud, his expression shifting from confusion to anger. "What the hell does that mean, Sarah?" The tension in the air was palpable. The passengers around them began to watch the scene, both curious and uncomfortable. "David, it's not what you think," Sarah tried to explain, her voice trembling. Emily, sitting beside them, looked from one adult to the other, her expression confused and worried. "Mom? Dad? What's going on?" Jack stepped in, trying to calm the situation. "Look, I can explain." "Explain what?" David interrupted, furious. "Who are you really? How do you know my wife and daughter?" Other passengers started to stand, eager to leave the plane and escape the rising tension. Jack knew he had to control the situation before it spiraled completely out of hand. "Please, let's talk about this in private," Jack pleaded, aware of the curious eyes around them. Sarah placed a hand on David's arm, trying to calm him down. "David, not here. Not in front of Emily." But Emily wasn't naive. She looked at Jack with new curiosity, as if piecing together a puzzle. "Mr. Jack," she said softly, "do I know you from somewhere?" The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah turned pale, David clenched his fists, and Jack felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. "Emily, sweetheart," Sarah began, her voice shaking, "we'll talk about this later, okay?" But Emily persisted. "No, Mom. Something's wrong here. Why are you all acting so strange?" David, still holding the crumpled note, glared at Sarah. "You owe me an explanation. Now." The last few passengers passed by, casting curious glances at the tense scene. Jack knew they needed to get off the plane, but the situation seemed ready to explode at any moment. "David," Sarah said, her voice low and intense. He's Emily's biological father." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Emily gasping in shock. David stood still for a moment, processing the information. Then, without warning, he lunged at Jack, grabbing him by the shirt. "You bastard! You abandoned them, and now you come back like nothing happened?" "David, no!" Sarah shouted, pulling him back. Emily started crying, the reality of the situation finally hitting her. He's my father? But you're my dad." Jack, stunned by David's violent reaction and Emily's tears, tried to speak. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I just what?" David yelled. "Just wanted to destroy our family?" "Enough," Sarah exclaimed, stepping between the two men. "Not here, not now. Let's get off the plane and talk like adults." Reluctantly, David let go of Jack. The four of them headed toward the plane's exit, the tension between them almost tangible. As they walked down the disembarking corridor, Emily suddenly stopped. I need to go to the bathroom," she murmured, her voice choked with emotion. "I'll take her," Sarah said, casting a warning glance at David and Jack. But as soon as Sarah and Emily walked toward the restroom, Emily did something unexpected. In one quick motion, she pulled away from her mother's hand and ran, disappearing into the crowd of the airport. "Emily!" Sarah screamed, the panic evident in her voice. David and Jack, forgetting their animosity for a moment, ran to help. The airport was huge, and Emily could be anywhere. "We have to find her," Jack said, the worry clear in his voice. David glared at him, a mix of anger and fear in his eyes. "This is your fault. If anything happens to her—" "Stop," Sarah interrupted. "This isn't the time for that. We need to find Emily." The three of them split up, each heading in a different direction in the crowded airport. Jack ran, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew Emily was scared and confused, and he felt responsible for it. As he frantically searched for his lost daughter, Jack wondered how things had gotten to this point. What had started as a routine flight had turned into an emotional nightmare, and somewhere in the vast Los Angeles airport, a scared and confused little girl was hiding, trying to understand how her life had changed so drastically in just a few hours. Los Angeles airport buzzed with activity as Jack, Sarah, and David frantically searched for Emily. The hurried passengers and flight announcements made the search even more difficult. "Emily!" Sarah called out, her face pale with worry. Jack ran between shops and restaurants, his eyes scanning every corner. He blamed himself for the whole situation. If only he hadn't given her that note. After 20 intense minutes, Jack spotted a familiar pair of sneakers under a table in an abandoned cafe. His heart raced. "Emily," he called softly, kneeling down. Emily was curled up, silent tears streaming down her face. She looked at Jack, her eyes full of confusion and fear. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why is everyone fighting?" Jack felt a lump in his throat. "Emily, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. Can I sit with you?" Emily reluctantly nodded. Jack sat beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "Are you really my dad?" Emily asked bluntly, surprising Jack with her maturity. Before Jack could answer, David appeared, breathless and furious. "Get away from her," he shouted, rushing toward Jack. Emily shrank back, frightened by David's reaction. Jack stood up, trying to calm the situation. "David, please, let's talk like adults," Jack pleaded. "Talk? You show up out of nowhere and want to talk?" David was shaking with anger. At that moment, Sarah arrived, relieved to see Emily. "Thank God you're okay," she said, hugging her daughter. Emily pulled away from the embrace. "Mom, I want the truth. Now." The airport terminal seemed to freeze around them. Sarah looked at Jack, then at David, and finally at Emily. "Emily," Sarah began, her voice trembling. He's your biological father." The silence that followed was deafening. Emily looked from one adult to the other, processing the information. But Dad!" She looked at David, confused and hurt. David visibly struggled with his emotions. "Emily, I'll always be your dad, no matter what happens." Jack felt like an outsider, but he knew he had to speak. "Emily, I've made many mistakes. I left you and your mom a long time ago, but I want you to know, I never stopped thinking about you." David couldn't hold back. "Thinking about her? You abandoned her. I've been there for every moment of her life." "David, please," Sarah intervened. "This isn't helping." Emily, surprising everyone, spoke with unexpected calm. "I want to talk to Jack. Alone." All the adults were stunned by her request. "Emily, I don't think that's a good idea," David protested. "Please," Emily insisted. "I need to understand." Seeing the determination in her daughter's eyes, Sarah nodded slowly. "All right, but we'll be nearby." Jack, nervous but grateful for the opportunity, agreed. "Of course, Emily. Whatever you want." As Emily and Jack walked to a quieter corner of the terminal, David grabbed Sarah's arm. "How could you keep this from me all these years?" he asked, his voice full of hurt. Sarah sighed heavily. "David, I thought I was protecting Emily and you. I never imagined Jack would come back." Meanwhile, Emily sat on a nearby bench, Jack beside her. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unasked questions and owed explanations. "Why did you leave us?" Emily finally asked, her voice small but firm. Jack felt the weight of 10 years of regret. "Emily, I was young and scared. I wasn't ready to be a father. It was the biggest mistake of my life." Emily absorbed his words, her eyes fixed on her hands. "Do you regret it?" "Every single day," Jack replied without hesitation. "Not a day goes by that I don't think about you and your mom." Emily lifted her eyes, meeting Jack's gaze. And now? Why are you here now? Jack hesitated, remembering Emily's medical condition. He knew he needed to be honest. Emily, I found out something about your health, something I can help with. Emily's eyes widened. You know about my illness? Jack nodded, feeling the weight of the revelation. I think I might be a compatible donor for you. Emily was silent for a moment, processing the information. Then, to Jack's surprise, she reached out and took his hand. Thank you for telling me the truth, she said softly. Jack felt tears welling up in his eyes. This small gesture from his daughter, whom he barely knew, meant more than he could express. Across the terminal, Sarah and David watched the interaction, both struggling with their own emotions. The future they thought they had planned was now uncertain, shaken by Jack's unexpected presence. As Emily and Jack continued their conversation, a new reality began to take shape for everyone involved. A reality none of them could have predicted when they boarded that seemingly ordinary flight. Emily and Jack remained seated on the airport bench, the initial tension giving way to a more open conversation. So, do you really think you can help me? Emily asked, her voice a mix of hope and skepticism. Jack nodded. I have the same rare blood type as your mom. There's a good chance I'll be a match for the bone marrow transplant. Emily was silent for a moment, processing the information. Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. Jack felt a lump in his throat. Emily, I know I don't have the right to be your father, but you're my daughter. I want to do whatever it takes to help you. Meanwhile, not far away, David was confronting Sarah. How could you lie to me all these years? David demanded, his voice trembling with anger and hurt. Sarah tried to explain. David, I thought I was protecting Emily. I never imagined Jack would come back. And if he hadn't shown up, would you have ever told me the truth? David asked. Sarah hesitated, and her silence was enough of an answer for David. I don't know if I can keep going with this, Sarah, David said, his voice breaking. I need some time. Back on the bench, Emily looked at Jack with curiosity. What was your life like before? Why did you decide to become a flight attendant? Jack smiled sadly. I guess part of me was always searching for something, or someone. Emily nodded, understanding more than Jack had expected. I've always felt like something was missing in my life. Now I know what it was. Emily's words hit Jack like a punch. He realized just how much his absence had impacted her life. At that moment, Sarah approached, looking shaken. Emily, Jack, we need to talk. All of us. They joined David, who kept a palpable distance from Sarah. Jack decided it was time to be completely honest. I know my presence has complicated things, but I truly believe I can help Emily with her medical condition. David, still visibly upset, looked at Emily. What do you want to do, sweetheart? Emily, surprising everyone with her maturity, replied, I want the chance to get healthy. If Jack can help, I think we should try. Sarah nodded, tears in her eyes. I agree. Emily's health is the most important thing right now. David looked conflicted, but he finally agreed. Okay. But that doesn't change the fact that we have a lot to work out, Sarah. As they discussed the next steps, a murmur began to form around them. People with cameras and microphones were approaching. Oh no, Sarah muttered. How did they find out? A reporter came up. Excuse me, are you the family involved in today's flight drama? Can we ask a few questions? Jack quickly stepped between the reporter and his newly found family. No comment, please. Respect our privacy. More reporters joined in, asking questions and snapping photos. The situation was spiraling out of control. We need to get out of here, David said, shielding Emily. Sarah nodded. Let's go home. We can talk more there. As they tried to distance themselves from the media, Emily grabbed Jack's hand. You're coming with us, right? Jack looked at Sarah and David, uncertain. Sarah gave a slight nod. while David maintained a neutral expression. "If that's what you want, Emily," Jack responded. As they headed for the exit, dodging reporters, Jack realized his life had changed irrevocably. He had a chance to make things right, but the road ahead would be tough. David and Sarah walked apart, the gap between them evident. Emily, between Jack and her parents, seemed like the link holding them together. When they reached the parking lot, Sarah turned to everyone. "We need to quickly decide how we're going to handle this. The media isn't going to just go away." David, still distant, agreed. "Maybe we should make an official statement. Control the narrative." Jack, feeling out of place but determined to help, suggested, "I can talk to the airline. They have a public relations team that could help us." Emily, watching the tension between the adults, spoke up. "I just want everyone to stop fighting. Can we just go home and talk?" Her words reminded everyone that, at the center of all this drama, was a girl who needed them united. Sarah nodded, making a decision. "Let's go home. Jack, you're coming with us. We need to figure this out together for Emily." As they got into the car, with reporters still trying to get statements, each of them knew that the next few hours would be crucial. Secrets had been revealed, relationships shaken, and a young girl stood in the middle of it all, hoping the adults in her life would do the right thing. Jack looked out the car window, watching the airport fade into the distance. He knew he was leaving behind not just a place, but his entire former life. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was on the right path. The family took refuge in a private room at the airport, courtesy of Jack's airline. The tension was palpable as everyone settled in, with Emily in the center, flanked by Sarah and David, and Jack seated across from them. Jack was the first to break the silence. "I know this situation is complicated, but I think we should focus on what's best for Emily right now." Sarah nodded, holding Emily's hand. "Jack's right. Emily, sweetheart. What do you think about all this?" Emily looked at each of the adults before responding. "I just want to be okay. If Jack can help, I think we should try. But..." She hesitated, looking at David. "I don't want to lose my dad." David, visibly emotional, hugged Emily. "You'll never lose me, honey, no matter what." Jack leaned forward. "I'm willing to take the compatibility test right away, but the final decision is up to you, Sarah and David." Sarah looked at David, seeking his reaction. David took a deep breath, clearly struggling with his emotions. "If this can help Emily, then we should try. But it doesn't change the fact that you left us, Jack." Jack accepted the criticism with a nod. "I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it." Sarah, trying to mediate, suggested, "We can do the test and see the results before making any final decisions." Emily, surprising everyone, spoke up. "I want to get to know Jack better, but I don't want anything to change between us, Dad," she said, looking at David. David hugged Emily tighter. "Nothing will change between us, Princess. I'll always be your dad." Jack, watching the scene, felt a mixture of gratitude and guilt. "Emily, I'm not here to replace David. He's your dad in every way that matters. I just want to help, and if you'll allow it, be a part of your life." Sarah, sensing growth in everyone, suggested, "How about we start slow? Jack can visit us, get to know Emily better, and we'll see how things progress." David, still hesitant, agreed. "All right, but let's set some clear boundaries." As they discussed the details, Jack's phone rang. It was Amanda, his fiancée. Jack looked at the phone, then at the family in front of him, and made a decision. "Excuse me, I need to take this," he said, leaving the room. Minutes later, Jack returned, looking shaken but resolute. "I just ended my engagement," he announced. "I realized I need to sort out my past before I can move forward." The revelation surprised everyone. Sarah looked at Jack with a mix of admiration and concern. David seemed uncomfortable but nodded in acknowledgement. Emily, always perceptive, asked, "Did you do that because of us?" Jack knelt in front of Emily. "I did it because I realized I have a lot to fix, and I want to be fully present for that. No distractions or divided commitments." Sarah gently touched Jack's arm. "That's a big decision, Jack. Are you sure?" Jack nodded. "Absolutely. You all are my priority now." David, observing the interaction, spoke up. "Look, I'm still angry and hurt, but I see that you're trying to do the right thing. Let's give this a chance for Emily's sake." The atmosphere in the room shifted, a sense of common purpose uniting everyone. Sarah, always practical, asked, "What about the media outside? How are we going to handle that?" Jack suggested, "We can make a brief statement, something vague saying we're dealing with a private family matter and asking for respect." David agreed. "Yes, the fewer details the better. Emily doesn't need that media circus." Emily, who had been quiet for a while, spoke up. "Can I say something too? I want people to know I'm okay and happy with my family." Everyone looked at Emily with pride. Her maturity and strength continued to surprise them. Sarah smiled at her daughter. "Of course you can, sweetheart. We're all very proud of you." Jack, feeling part of something bigger for the first time in years, said, "So, we're facing this together?" David extended his hand to Jack, a gesture of truce. "Together, for Emily." Jack shook David's hand, grateful for the chance. Sarah hugged Emily, tears in her eyes. "We're a family, different, complicated, but a family." They prepared to leave, knowing they would face challenges, but united by a common purpose. Emily, standing between her parents and Jack, smiled, feeling whole for the first time. As they opened the door to the room, they were met by camera flashes and reporters' questions. But this time, instead of running, they faced the media together, as a united family, uncertain of the future but determined to face it together. 6 months had passed since the dramatic reunion at the airport. Emily's family gathered for a Sunday barbecue, a new tradition symbolizing their ever-evolving reality. Jack arrived on time, carrying a bag of gifts. Emily ran to embrace him, her face glowing with health. "Jack, you came. I wouldn't miss this for the world." Jack smiled, handing over the bag. "How are you feeling?" "Better than ever," Emily replied, leading him to the backyard where Sarah and David were preparing the food. Sarah waved, her smile warm but tinged with caution. "Hi, Jack. Glad you could make it." David, flipping burgers on the grill, gave a short nod. Jack. The tension was palpable, but significantly less than months ago. Healing was underway, not just for Emily, but for the whole family. As they sat down to eat, Emily couldn't contain her excitement. "You know, my doctor said he's never seen such a fast recovery. All thanks to you, Jack." Jack blushed, still not used to the praise. "I just did what any father would do." David cleared his throat at the word father, but quickly recovered. "The important thing is that you're doing well, Emily." Sensing the tension, Sarah changed the subject. "How's the new job, Jack?" Jack had left his job as a flight attendant to be closer to Emily. "It's going well. The logistics company is challenging, but I'm enjoying it." The conversation flowed more easily after that, with Emily talking about school and her new friends. Jack listened attentively, absorbing every detail of the life he had almost lost. Later, as Emily showed Jack her new science project, Sarah and David spoke quietly in the kitchen. "He's really trying," Sarah said. David sighed. "I know. It's hard sometimes, but seeing Emily happy makes it worth it." Sarah gently touched David's arm. "Thank you for being so understanding. I know it hasn't been easy." David kissed Sarah's forehead. "We're in this together, remember?" Outside, Jack helped Emily with her experiment. "You're really smart, you know that? You take after your mom." Emily smiled. And you. The doctor said your DNA is part of why I recovered so well. Jack felt a lump in his throat. Emily, It's okay, she interrupted. I get it now. You made mistakes, but you're here now. That's what matters. Emily's maturity never ceased to amaze him. When it was time for Jack to leave, there was a moment of hesitation. Emily looked at David, who gave a slight nod. Jack, Emily began, we'd like you to come to my piano recital next week. If you can, of course. Jack looked to Sarah and David, seeking approval. They both nodded. I'd love to, Jack replied, moved. As Jack said goodbye, Emily hugged him tightly. Thank you for making me whole, she whispered. On the porch, Sarah and David watched the scene. I never thought we'd get here, Sarah said. David took her hand. Neither did I. But here we are. Jack waved one last time before getting into his car. He looked at the family on the porch, his family, in a new and complex way, and felt a wave of gratitude. Driving home, Jack reflected on the past months. The successful transplant, the carefully negotiated visits, the moments of tension and joy. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. At home, he picked up a photo of Emily he kept on his bedside table. Next to it was a picture of Amanda. Jack touched the photo of his ex-fiancée gently. Ending the engagement had been hard, but necessary. He couldn't build a future while his past remained unresolved. Jack picked up his phone, rereading Emily's last message. Can't wait to see you at the recital. Love you. 3 words he never thought he'd hear. 3 words that changed everything. Jack smiled as he replied, I love you too. I'll be there. Setting the phone aside, Jack looked out the window. The sun was setting, painting the sky in vibrant colors. A new day would come soon, bringing new challenges and new joys. Jack was ready to face them all, grateful for the second chance he had been given. A chance to be a father, to make a difference, to love and be loved. It wasn't the life he had planned, but it was the life he now embraced with all his heart. The following week, the day of Emily's recital arrived. Jack was nervous, adjusting his tie as he entered the school auditorium. He spotted Sarah and David in the front row and hesitated for a moment. Sarah saw him and waved, indicating an empty seat beside them. Jack approached, still feeling a bit out of place. Thanks for inviting me, Jack whispered. David nodded. Emily wanted you here. It's important to her. The lights dimmed, and the recital began. As Emily took the stage, all 3 adults leaned forward, eager. She found them in the audience and smiled, her eyes sparkling. The first notes of her music filled the air. Jack felt his heart swell with pride. He glanced at Sarah and David, seeing the same pride in their faces. In that moment, Jack realized they shared something deep and unbreakable, their love for Emily. That connection, though complicated, was real and valuable. After the recital, as they waited for Emily, a woman approached them. You must be Emily's parents, she said, smiling. She's an amazing girl, so talented and kind. There was a brief, awkward silence. Jack opened his mouth to explain, but David surprised him. Yes, we are, David said, including Jack with a gesture. We're very proud of her. The woman smiled and walked away, leaving the 3 in a silence laden with meaning. Thank you, Jack said to David, moved. David shrugged, but there was a new understanding in his eyes. It's the truth, isn't it? We all love her. Sarah took both men's hands, her eyes brimming with tears. Yes, we do. And she loves us. All of us. Emily ran up to them, beaming. Did you see? I didn't miss a single note. The 3 of them hugged her simultaneously, forming a circle of love around her. Later that night, after Emily had gone to bed, the 3 adults sat on the porch, each with a cup of coffee. I never properly thanked you, Jack said, breaking the silence. For taking such good care of her. For being the parents I couldn't be. Sarah gently touched Jack's arm. "You're here now. That's what matters." David took a deep breath. "You know, Jack, I spent months being angry at you, but seeing how happy Emily is, maybe there's room for all of us in her life." Jack swallowed hard, emotional. "I promise I'll do my best to earn that place." "We all will," Sarah said, looking at the two men who loved her daughter in different but equally deep ways. The silence that followed was no longer tense but comfortable. It was the silence of a non-traditional family, united by love. As Jack left that night, he paused in the driveway, looking at the lit-up house. He thought of all the nights he had spent alone, filled with regret and longing. Now, he had a second chance. A chance to be part of something bigger than himself. A family. Jack got into his car, feeling lighter than he had in years. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, he faced it with hope and gratitude. As he drove home, Jack made a silent promise to Emily, Sarah, David, and himself. He would do everything in his power to honor this second chance, to be the father, the friend, and the man they all deserved. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with difficult moments and complicated conversations. But now Jack knew he wasn't alone. He had a family, imperfect, unexpected, but his. And that, he realized, was the greatest gift of all. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to show your support. Like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and let us know what decision you would have made in Jack's place.
Your opinion is valuable to us.
Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next moving stories, exploring family bonds and the second chances life offers us. Remember, sometimes life's greatest challenges lead us to our greatest moments of redemption.